Then we have our forums team, which is putting on this event tonight. And we have an event the third Wednesday of every month on a different theme related to the built environment and sustainability. So, we've had them on transportation, on sustainable fashion, on social justice. They really just span the whole universe of topics. And then our third thrust is on tours, which is really exciting when we are able to do things in person. And we have tours all across New York City on buildings that are green and doing great. But our tours team has done an incredible job of putting things online and making that accessible to people at home too. And we have a really incredible tour coming up later in May at Jones Beach. So that'll be really cool. And I'll put those dates at the end of the presentation. As I said, Green Home is entirely volunteer-led, and usually when we're in person, we have people raise their hand if they're volunteers. But I will say that, Green Home takes a village, and there are quite a few volunteers who've helped out. And if you're interested in volunteering, you can scan this QR code, or you can just check out on GreenHomeNYC's website. But there are all sorts of different opportunities and ways to get involved, and you can really jump in however you like. So with that, tonight's event, how has COVID-19 impacted energy usage? We have 3 speakers. Really excited to hear from them. Matthew Chamish, Director of Energy and Sustainability at JLL. Adam Fisher, Senior Project Manager of Energy and Sustainability at JLL. And Charles Sarati, the CEO with Purge Virus. So I will let them give their own introductions, but they are all very interesting, and I'm really excited to hear from them. And so we'll hear from all of them, and at the end, we will have time for a Q&A, but please definitely post your questions in the chat link box, and, that way we can keep conversation going throughout the event, and just keep it lively. So with that, I will hand it over to Matt and Adam, but again, thank you all for joining.
Well, thank you very much, Jenny. Appreciate it. And it's a pleasure to be here at Green Home. I know this is an organization. I went to a lot of meetings when I was a student, so it's good to be able to come here and present. So I'm Matt Chamish. I'm the director with JLL's Energy and Sustainability Group. For those of you who may not be familiar with JLL, we're a real estate services firm with over 90,000 employees, managing over 3 billion square feet globally. So we're really focused on commercial, industrial, but support various market segments and everything from brokerage to financing to project management. And what Adam and I specifically specialize in is our energy and sustainability group. So we have over 400 professionals focused on energy and sustainability. And we're happy to talk about our experience with COVID and what we're seeing. And Adam, I'll let you do an introduction as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt. Hi, everyone. My name is Adam Fisher. As I said, I'm a Senior Project Manager in Energy and Sustainability Services. I've been working in energy sustainability and wellness in the commercial office space, primarily here in New York City, for almost a decade now. And I have a background in mechanical engineering, but I've worked on a lot of projects to understand the intersection of sustainability, energy efficiency, and indoor environmental quality. And the team that I'm working on based here in the Northeast at JLL has been a leader in terms of developing and implementing some of the COVID-19 response efforts that throughout kind of the portfolios that we work with. So excited to talk about some of those strategies and how we think about it.
Thanks. So let me see, everyone should be able to see my slides now, and jump in if that's a problem. But we're going to start with general trends that we're seeing as an organization. Adam's going to talk about the healthy return to work and what we're calling what we're calling it, and I'll talk more about energy and sustainability, what we're seeing from kind of global organizations and how COVID has had some impact there, but really talking more generally about some of the trends we're seeing out of COVID. Obviously, as a real estate services firm, a big question, and I think this is a big New York City question, is how and if everyone's going to come back and work in offices again. And obviously, there's a bit of a vested interest for a firm with a lot of brokers and people who service commercial real estate to have a pretty bullish expectation on this. Fortunately, I think we were pretty far in the forefront years ago when we were actually recommending a lot of organizations decrease their space and kind of really go to this remote working model prior. So, I was pretty flexible, working anywhere from 1 to 2 days at home, before COVID. So, it's a surprising position as a real estate firm, but we're trying to figure out, what our future demands are and how to calibrate organizations appropriately, and what we're calling it the future of work, what that looks like, and how that impacts cities and the surrounding area as well. So we've taken a lot of surveys and trying to understand where the market is heading in these kinds of discussions. What we're finding is what people miss and what people don't miss. And what people miss generally is each other, which is nice. It's good. So they miss face-to-face human interaction, socializing with colleagues. And it's, that's part of where what is the biggest driver. I think that's going to return people back to some form of, whether it's in person or flexible work type environment. You can see this is really interesting survey of people in EMEA, which is our kind of designation for Europe and the Middle East, and that we saw a pretty significant change from before COVID, how people were thinking about flex space and how interested they were in working from home, to now post-COVID, the fact that only 2% say they'll never, be work from home type people. So it's a pretty drastic change from 32%, and one that we expect to kind of hold over, across geographies. So pretty interesting. And what does that do to the space? So I think part of what Jenny had asked when she originally reached out to us was how are spaces going to look different? And I think this was already a trend prior to COVID, is the kind of moving from cubes to open office space, I think was pretty generally accepted. But I think what we're going to see is a lot more interactive space design, where it's meant around actually being a community, driving face-to-face interactions, and how people can then formally work with each other. And that's the trends we're expecting, and what we're seeing in terms of innovative space requests. So we're trying to then work back and understand how this is going to impact urbanization. And so, again, we have a whole global research department. They focus on a lot of this. I really try and understand how it's going to impact our clients from an energy and sustainability perspective. And so I think what the questions we're asking are here in terms of, how this is going to impact the city in the future. And, I think what we're anticipating is what we're calling this hyper-connected metropolitan region, where it's kind of a hub and spoke, where there's a short-term kind of change with rising of satellite cities and satellite workspace, clustering, so a little bit of a pushback, and then kind of a reshaping of an urban environment to be more legacy, collaborative, younger demographics. So it's a pretty interesting perspective. I'm not by any means the expert in everything market-based or brokerage and how we're guiding people into spaces, but I certainly am connected to this from a perspective of how that impacts our clients while they're pursuing their sustainability goals. So I think this is, and Adam, I'll jump when you need me to because I'm steering here. Adam will talk about healthy return.
I'm unmuted. Thanks, Matt. So what we want to be talking about now, so after going into kind of some of the trends that we're seeing of how the spaces are changing, what does it mean to actually have a healthy space? And why is that important? And what are some of those considerations? So next slide. So kind of why are healthy spaces important? It might sound like a really obvious question, but there are also some less obvious answers to it, especially so in terms of some of the more research that we have, we've seen that healthy buildings yield higher rents per square foot. So from the perspective of an owner operator of a building, having a healthier space and having especially some of these amenities when you talk about health and wellness, those are things that can actually add to additional revenue for the properties. Also understanding that healthier spaces also lead to improved cognitive function and reduction in things like sick building symptoms. So this is one of the things that even before things like wellness, quote unquote, became even more in vogue over the last few years, and then even more so now with COVID-19, there's an aspect with sustainable buildings with regards to indoor environmental quality. That's always been a big priority, and there's a deep connection between cognitive function, productivity, and appropriate indoor environmental quality, especially air quality and even light quality, presence of biophilia, other sorts of things that improve the wellness, quote unquote, of a space. And now even more so, actually last slide, or this one. Even more so, this is actually an expectation of employees and occupants of buildings, especially as we move into this quote unquote re-entry period, that aspects related to health and well-being are going to be incorporated. Matt was talking a little bit about some of the things that we miss when we're doing full-time working from home, and I think some of those aspects of the amenities and perks that are in the office and making sure that that is just as safe of a place to be in the office as you were at your home are one of those things that is very much expected in this space. So when we're talking about why are we even thinking about healthy return, especially when we're talking about commercial offices, is what we're seeing from our research is that 80% of office workers were expecting to be back in the office in some capacity by December 2021. So it's really important to actually even be starting to think now, because that entry process is going to be sooner and sooner, and not even before you get to that 80%. So to understand what are some of the strategies, what are some of the key areas to be focused on so that you can engage the building occupants or employees as a part of this. Next slide. So when we are talking with building owners or operators from a variety of different building use types, whether that's commercial or multifamily, or talking with retail clients of ours, there are a number of different questions and considerations when we're trying to help them identify what do they need to be doing for a healthy reentry and healthy spaces. So the first thing there is there's a lot of guidance that's coming out there. So helping them understand and parse through which are the guidelines that you need to be following, how do you know which ones to follow, where can you kind of pick and choose what's the best thing that's applicable to your building while still meeting some of those initial standards. With a lot of these standards that are being put out there, helping our clients understand how do you stack up against either your peers or just against the expectations. Again, there's a lot of things going on, so we are there to help to be able to identify kind of that sort of benchmark. Additionally, one of the big things is also understanding how can you engage your employees, or how can you engage your tenants or other occupants there. One of the biggest trends that we've been seeing with regards to health and wellness, and especially healthy reentry, has specifically been about the connection between the good work that the building owners and operators are doing and making sure that those standards and practices are being effectively communicated to employees, tenants, and occupants. because it's obviously good to be doing the right things to ensure a safe and healthy place, but kind of the other major half of this is making sure that the tenants and occupants know what's going on to ease their stress and anxiety, because this is not just about is it physically a healthy space with indoor environmental quality, but also is it perceived as a healthy space is just as important. Next slide. So again, when we're working with various properties or facilities in terms of understanding health and wellness gaps, we're trying to focus on what should you do immediately and what are the things that you need to be setting up into the future. So there are 4 key areas that we focus on when we're going throughout this process. There are a lot of different standards that we can apply, but we generally are working an understanding of what is specific to each of these different facilities or properties. So the first of those being site level risk. So understanding the actual risk on site, and especially the interaction between building occupants and one another, and the things that the facilities management team or property management team can have control over. So understanding having things like cleaning or replacing high-touch fixtures with contactless fixtures. Let's say if you're in like a multi-tenant floor and you have bathrooms, or installing floor markings and signage to indicate kind of being able to keep space from others. Those are all things that are important to be able to reduce the site level risk on site. From there, there's a focus on cleaning and disinfection. So that is both having things that are available for the tenants or occupants, like hand sanitizer or other sorts of things, as well as making sure that you're engaging a custodial or facility staff in terms of the best practices for cleaning throughout the properties. As I mentioned earlier, focused on indoor air quality specifically, so ensuring that there's an appropriate amount of air that's coming in, or trying to maximize that or optimize that where possible to make sure that those refresh rates are happening to the best of the ability within your building system. Lastly, in addition to the specific health considerations, there's also this well-being consideration as well. So as we discussed, these are things that are really expected more and more, especially in commercial offices, of being able to provide some of these amenities. So what we do is kind of work and brainstorm to understand what's feasible for a specific site and what are the things that are new expectations or ways to even improve the amenities, such as for a specific corporate occupier or tenant, if they're providing food for their staff members, making sure that those food options are actually healthier options is kind of one of the key areas that we've seen as a way to be able to improve that. And next slide. So as we discussed, it's just as important to be able to communicate what the good work that's being done as much as it is to be able to do that good work. So one of the key areas that we've seen to be able to communicate this good work is through established certification programs. So you may be familiar with like a LEED certification program, which is associated with sustainable building operations. There are also 2 primary health and wellness certifications that are popular here in the United States, one of which being the WELL building standard and the other one being Fitwell. Each of these building standards came up with their own best practice and kind of slimmed down, streamlined version specifically focused on health and safety. And specifically in response to COVID-19. So working on things like operational policies, maintenance protocols, making sure that emergency plans in place, and really focusing on this last piece of stakeholder engagement. So we've seen this as one of the really key areas of being able to communicate the good work with this recognizable kind of seal and promotion that's been happening, especially for WELL Health and Safety. It's one of the things that's kind of gained steam in particular over the past several months. They had a big campaign recently that got my attention, where they had some big names like Jennifer Lopez and Lady Gaga and Robert De Niro that were all kind of speaking to the program and being able to identify buildings that you walk into as ones that are aligning with COVID safety protocols. And this is something that we've been working on with whole building clients or corporate occupier tenant clients. There's really a lot of different kind of applicability for this sort of rating. And then just the last slide is also just referencing the fact that there is one related to Fitwel viral response module. So again, both of these are kind of competing certification programs. Sometimes one is a better fit for a building than another. A lot of the times buildings are also looking to, if they were thinking about getting a more comprehensive Fitwel or WELL certification, then they might go with one of the more slimmed down versions for how they can demonstrate their viral response or COVID-19 reentry. Okay. And I will hand it back to Matt to talk about energy and sustainability.
Great, thanks, Adam. Yeah, so talking about energy and sustainability, I think the prompt and one of some of the questions we got from Jenny and the team was around what actually reduced during COVID and what were those impacts. And I would say it hasn't been a lot. If anyone's looking at the new Bill Gates climate change book, I think he quoted the reduction of the entire year at 8%, which is kind of staggering when you think of how little was actually done, especially when you're talking about buildings in New York City with either 5 to 10% of occupancy, if that. So I think that 8% is pretty on point with what we've seen in New York. Really seeing the range of numbers I saw from 8 to 13% on typical reductions in buildings, and there's a couple of reasons for that. These buildings really aren't designed to run with no one in them, especially if you're an investor. You can't actually cut all the utilities to the building because then your tenant is entitled not to pay rent. So it puts it in a bit of an awkward situation there. So that's something I've heard from a lot of property owners and investors. And so it's definitely been less of an impact. And out of that, I think there's been more of an awareness of climate change. And I think a big indicator of that, there's an organization called the Science-Based Target Initiative. It's kind of related to Carbon Disclosure Project, which is another large nonprofit entity which tracks corporate carbon emissions. And so what Science-Based Target requires companies to do is set a goal that's puts them in alignment with reducing their portion of climate change to below 1.5 degrees, kind of a corporate kind of alignment with the Paris protocols. And so the thing here is that there wasn't really a lot of buy-in. It's very difficult. You have to submit a pretty detailed plan that includes not just your emissions and what you use on your sites, but those of your suppliers. So from 2015 to 2019, we saw 562 companies that were part of this organization or had submitted targets and goals. In all of 2020, nearly doubled with another 544 companies. So pretty staggering alignment there in terms of organizations kind of taking this moment to reflect on potential other big screaming issues that they need to address through their operations. And so another big factor that's really pushed organizations and coming out of COVID is this alignment with ESG funds. So for those of you who don't know, there's this term that's grown in popularity, and this was really in momentum, prior. If you just look at 2019, it's a huge jump from 2018 around environmental, social, and governance. So, every major organization now is reporting, how they align certain parameters that, put them in this category. And there's a lot of money moving out of traditional funds into funds with higher, let's say, rated scores. There's a lot of, let's say, inconsistency with how you measure environmental, social, governance. Do you care more about governance and non-corruption, or social issues like diversity, or environmental, or all of the above? How do they get ranked? And so there's a lot of different organizations trying to categorize this and tell people what it means for the risk of their money. So I think what's really driving this is the notion that these companies that are higher performing than their peers in this area are going to get better investment. They're going to get lower cost of capital and other huge business drivers. And that in turn is having them turn to their real estate and understand how they can be more sustainable. So it's been a pretty big shift. And so what that leads to is them talking to us and saying, we've set these really ambitious goals. How do we do it? So, it's about, we're calling this the action gap. And so there's about 90 to 88 to 96% of companies that we're really talking to that have pretty ambitious sustainability targets, and 20% of them around have some kind of clear specific plan and how they're going to achieve these goals over the next 10, 20 years. So there's a pretty big gap in saying they're going to do things and really doing them. And what's good is they really have the senior level commitment to go and start really achieving these goals, and that's what we expect to see starting really this year. Obviously there's a lot of organizations that have been more proactive in the past, but even those organizations are setting either second or third generation targets around sustainability. And so how are we tracking this? Which was a question. There's a lot of kind of technology going into how to better track emissions and carbon. We're talking about some organizations with global footprints that have thousands of sites, and they haven't historically been able to really track their emissions by region, by location. We've created tools and expertise to do that. So we have over 80,000 sites that we track. We're expecting that to grow pretty significantly. And what we're doing is really using this as a proactive tool to find opportunities and benchmark sites across geographies, portfolios, and business units, and really find out where we can focus our efforts, where we can focus on cost savings and emission savings. And usually they're interrelated, but that's not always the case. And look at it on a global scale. So, pretty neat stuff. And we're happy to kind of be involved in the growth of this area. So it's been a pretty exciting time for us to be kind of tracking carbon and helping organizations with these big kind of screaming issues that they need to be taken care of. So that's my last slide. And I guess I'll open up for questions unless Jenny, you want to wait till after the next presentation, but happy to take them now.
Yeah, thank you so much, Matt and Adam. Maybe we can wait till the end to take questions. I see some activity in the chat box, but definitely everyone keep it up. There's a lot of interesting content. That was a great presentation. I think, to me, I don't know why you threw out so many interesting statistics, but the one that sort of makes me nervous is just 80% of workers will be returning back to the offices by December of 2021. And how do we prepare buildings and spaces to receive everyone back in a safe manner? So I just wonder all of the stuff, the precautions we need to take, and what's going to need to go into that. And I think Charlie will be getting into that a bit more in his presentation. But thank you both so much for that. I'm looking forward to digging more into that during the Q&A. Charlie, I'll hand it over to you.
Okay, can you see my screen?
I see it.
Great. So Green and Save, this goes back since we were invited here to speak from Green Home to the home that I built back in, this is coming up on 2007, so 14 years ago. And home savings includes a profile of the home. It happens to be solar, and we did 100 other measures. So this return on investment breakdown was one of the very first ways to score performance of homes. And this presentation today is going to include a significant portion of commercial energy conservation measures, the ECMs. But what we did with this years ago is we broke out, say, something as simple as a thermostat with cost and the annual projected savings based on US averages, and then put the return on investment as a percentage and also the payback time in years. And it's ranked. So no one had really ever set the standards for using math to put a scorecard together. And one of my favorite ones on here is the shower heads, because you get a payback inside of a year. One of the things that happens, and we're not going to click through obviously all of these, there are about 50 measures, is how you actually save more water than you would imagine, because you get the same feeling of the pressure, but they call them low flow shower heads. And I started referring to them as high performance shower heads, because they actually save more energy in terms of not having to heat as much water. So this idea of rethinking all the things that we do in our own homes has been fundamental since I finished up. It's coming up on now 30 years. So I finished at the University of Pennsylvania in 1993 with my master's thesis on energy intelligence as an architect. And I'm a lead AP. It's very exciting to see, an audience like this one connect the dots between COVID and what we can do to rethink architecture and, climate change, and what we really have to do to start looking all the way down in this list with the green advanced systems like the solar. So it starts with something as simple as the programmable thermostat, but then really advances into these, much more sophisticated cross ventilation, solar water, thermal mass, and all the other things. So I'm going to close this one out, but the link here is from the greenandsave.com website, and it's probably worth taking some time to click through it for your own apartments, residences, and also for multifamily. So I'm going to stop sharing that screen, and I'm going to go into the presentation, which is the PowerPoint slides. And it starts with what will be basically a breakdown of the Energy Intelligence Center. So I'm the CEO of the Energy Intelligence Center, and our sister company is Purge Virus, along with Independence LED. So this is about safe and efficient buildings, how we deal with COVID to save lives and to save money, cutting down the utility costs, using the indoor air quality as a vehicle for really not just COVID, but a new generation of thinking about sustainability in terms of respiratory disease and sick building syndrome, and also reducing operating costs. I'll go through this just with an overview and solution highlights, and then some of the big data and the other elements that we have here. So it starts with how we work in the process. And what we do is we typically like to go in and collect some data. We want to learn about the facilities existing, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, the HVAC system. So like a doctor, we want the blood work. We want to learn about the body. And we think of buildings as organisms. We did this just recently out at Navajo Nation in Window Rock for 10 of their buildings with disinfection and all kinds of solutions for COVID. And actually, we just learned that earlier this week that Dr. Jill Biden, the First Lady, is visiting on Friday our operations out there to see what's going on with the Navajo Nation and all the other COVID mitigation. So it's exciting. That's a pretty big deal to have someone from the White House take a visit. But it took a lot of work leading up to today and all the things that we've had to do. This data sheet, which is online, includes things such as the chillers, the utility bill averages, over the course of a month or a given year. It includes the BMS system. So it's really the more the better in terms of what we can collect. With this Biden administration,
Charlie, I'm just going to ask you to full screen the presentation if you can.
Say that again?
Can you full screen the presentation?
100%. How's that?
Awesome. Perfect.
I'm going to click back then just so you can see this bigger. And yeah, don't be shy to interrupt me along the way. But the percentage of the energy spent on HVAC, Buildings account for 40% of greenhouse gas emissions. So we have no choice but to look at buildings. I happen to have a Tesla, happen to have a solar house, that's great, but that does not make the difference. I also am like 80-20 plant-based diet to meat, you know, all the things we do in our lives counts. When it comes to what the Biden and Harris administration is up to, there's some big money out there. $519 billion, right, for state and local governments to help with schools, this multi-trillion-dollar infrastructure act and all the jobs and the weatherization and everything, all great news, you know, as we go forward into this new year. So the play here becomes, you know, how do we go through and basically look at the family, as we call it, the 5-star solutions that can make the most, you know, the most impact. We have with OptiKW inside of the Energy Intelligence Center, you know, the way with algorithmic technology to optimize existing systems. Ambient conditions are key. The temperature, the humidity, the dew point. And there's a lot of systems out there that do optimization, but don't take full advantage of the weather. CleanPeak, a terrific partner with the algorithmic software to use the thermal mass of a building as a battery. The Purge virus, which was, you know, really, you know, something in this last year that took off like a lightning, you know, bolt. The bipolar ionization, the ultraviolet, reducing the requirements, you know, for as much outside air replacement and keeping people safe. Independence LED lighting, blocking and tackling, we can do that in our sleep. You know, it's become a new standard. And I was at this early enough when we moved our manufacturing from Shenzhen to southeastern Pennsylvania in 2010 to have started pushing the ball up the hill about standards so that it wasn't enough just to use old lights. The same may become true for indoor air quality with ultraviolet and bipolar. And then there is the whole play, you know, with building fit and the analytics for the data. So combined, you know, we can cut this electricity bill typically in half for a lot of, you know, the players in the commercial and industrial space. And that's great news, you know, for how we go forward. Okay, the family. Here are the big parts: chiller plants, air handling, building management and building automation systems with the data, the lighting and the thermal mass, all come together. Not every account, not every multifamily apartment building for green housing, not every home is going to have all these parts, but they're sure going to have a few. And that's where we look at the solution to apply what makes the most sense to any given property. We're going to touch on these 5, starting with OptiKW. I referenced this already, the algorithmic side. Well, load sharing is crazy important. A lot of chillers run at peak efficiency at 65% of their capacity, but many facilities are running their chillers up to full capacity, not because they have been told not to do that, just because they're redlining their car because it may have been a default setting with their BMS to load that chiller to capacity. What we do with OptiKW is distribute cooling loads across the chillers based on the exact specs of each chiller and the outside air conditioning. This is complicated, meaning it's not like it's just as easy as saying set it at 65, because there are ways with backup chillers and needs of certain specs to create that balancing for the maximum benefit. With the synchronization, dozens of pieces of equipment within the HVAC system that are typically maintained or previously tuned, absolutely, prior to our engagement. But we see ourselves like an orchestra conductor. We synchronize the equipment and the ambient conditions to create the harmony. And that harmony is what results in the optimization and the savings. Now, here's an example. So I was down at the University of Maryland Medical Center, and I can tell you they were running about 176 kW on their chiller plant. It was about 72 or 3 degrees outside, and they wanted to get to 68. So it wasn't a heavy lift. Well, what we recommended doing was increasing the cooling tower fan speed. Now, they would typically say, well, don't do that because that's going to cost us money. And it did. It cost about 4 kW, But by increasing that fan speed and dropping the condenser water entry temperature, we were able on the spot load to bring that KW down to 133. So pretty exciting, right? So that's a 43% KW savings. We spent the equivalent of 3.8 or approximately 4 kW to do it. So in this model, the net savings is just about 40 kW. That's a 22% savings. They could not manage to do that every hour of every day based on the conditions, because we had to know the ambient conditions to set that cooling tower fan speed. And they looked at us and said, that's great. It happened in 90 seconds. They watched that drop in the energy consumption. And over the course of a year, you know, spending 40 cents to save $4 every hour is like over $32,000 of savings. And that's one of a dozen things that we can do. But it takes, you know, to humanly do it, you'd have to have someone on the roof. You'd have to have someone check the app for the Weather Bureau. You'd have to do all kinds of things. The algorithm automatically does it. And it does it every 10 minutes. And it's like autopilot for an airplane, where the pilot, being the facility manager, can choose to turn it off, and it just defaults to the previous settings. Okay, one of our other partners, the Energy Efficient Technologies Group, has Cryogen X4. This is tremendous technology, which is based on a liquid nanotech. So this fixes a known problem that is occurring in every HVAC refrigeration and freezer system. And this is the cost of the facility operators with their money on every machine, and even brand new ones. So the problem is small amounts of oil get past the piston or the crankshaft in these systems and embedded inside the Freon tubes. This reduces efficiency of units up to 30% over time. It may start with 2 or 3% in the first year, then 3 and 5, then 7, 8. It goes all the way up. It reduces the heat transfer or the cold, and it makes the equipment run longer to do the same job. So that equipment has to work harder. Well, with Cryogen X4, it removes and emulsifies the oil fouling at the heat exchange surfaces and activates the surface to enhance its ability to transfer heat, preventing the oil from ever adhering to the coils again, improving efficiency and capacity for the lifetime of the equipment. Now, the one-time treatment lasts a lifetime because of the nanotechnology and for the life of that equipment, and is deployed while the equipment is running without disrupting any of the business. Over 150,000 installations, off we go. The new Biden administration needs to know about lots of these technologies. I've just touched on the first two, proven and effective. Okay, with thermal mass. So here's CleanPeak. Helps facility owners and operators use their buildings for thermal energy storage to reduce energy consumption and reduce peak demand costs. So the energy storage technology harnesses the thermal mass of a large commercial office building to drive savings in electricity consumption. This could functionally work for a home or lots of buildings that are smaller than a commercial office, but the economy of scale and the thermal mass size just isn't there to see as big of a bang for the buck of the programming. Zero capital construction costs and no permitting. Here's how it works. Large building surface areas, concrete, drywall. They're cooled by an additional 1 to 2 degrees. They store that thermal energy on multi-megawatt comparable scale. Stored thermal energy is scientifically released back into the building's internal environment at optimum times. So using the thermal mass of commercial office buildings combined with their air conditioning system in the controlled manner allows the buildings to serve as a thermal energy storage. Think about pre-cooling the building in the summer at 5 in the morning when the cost of energy is lower and it's easier to cool it versus at noon to 3 p.m. when you pay a significantly higher rate typically for electricity and higher burden on the building. This is not, again, rocket science. It's the detail of how it's done that is the complicated sophistication. Raising the building's power demand moderately overnight and reducing its power requirements during peak demand during the day. Summer energy consumption is reduced. Awesome, good for business and the planet. Now, here's the moment in time with COVID. surges in Michigan, New Jersey, Rhode Island, right? We haven't gotten through this yet. So purge virus has come out of 3 years of my work with hospital-acquired infections, understanding what was happening with pathogens. When COVID hit, we launched purge virus within the week of the World Health Organization saying that it was a pandemic. We followed the CDC, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention guidelines for ventilation and air disinfection. We use advanced bipolar ionization that does not generate harmful ozone. Very important. This is part of the CDC guidelines because a pushback to ionization has been ozone. UL 867 and UL 2998 are the keys. 2998 is zero ozone. 867 is moderate levels, safe for humans. We're one of the only players in the game that can take care of both. With ultraviolet, we're using ultraviolet C, typical nanometers, 253.7, when appropriate in air handling units for larger scale facilities, and also portable devices. Both technologies safely integrate into the HVAC, and the key advantages, reducing particles, pathogens, neutralizing odors, saving energy and saving time on the maintenance because you extend the life of the equipment. You also can clean, depending on where you place either technology, the devices near the coil, the fan coil, to reduce the mold and mildew and those microorganisms that are growing to increase efficiency. This is that balance. Again, all these little rings we've heard of, masks, hand washing, physical distancing, surface cleaning, contact tracing, right? We know that from the news. Increased ventilation has not been promoted to the level I believe it should have by the CDC initially. They're now starting to see that with their recommendations online. Obviously, we have the vaccines rolling out and the testing and the screening. This cleaning the inside air could have been a priority more aggressively with the Trump administration, to beat this thing from the beginning, especially with schools, to keep them open. Okay. Ventilation and disinfection are complicated when it comes to aligning the right technology and correctly integrating advanced filtration, air quality monitoring, energy recovery ventilators, those are the ERVs, and economizers with building management systems. It's not enough for the CDC to just say, open the vents, open the windows, because in the heat of summer or in the dead of winter, you're asking operators of buildings, owners and tenants, to incur more energy costs. The key is balancing, not necessarily doubling or tripling the ventilation, but maintaining the ventilation and making the indoor air cleaner than outdoor air. So a surprisingly small percentage of HVAC service providers have the engineering and expertise to improve IAQ effectively and affordably. Purge Virus works with companies like PBBJ, a leading HVAC company that's done work all over the United States. So the ionization destroys the proteins on the surface of the virus. Great. It improves the indoor air quality. You reduce the requirements for as much intake or outside makeup air, still maintaining the ASHRAE standards. And the result is energy savings for reduced operating expense. Totally the balance of COVID and climate change. Some of the tech, I'm not going to get into all the details. You guys will get a recording of this, as well as I sent the team the link to this actual PDF. Different types of bipolar ionization and configuration. This is an example of the little emitters, the carbon fiber emitters, and those are soldered into the circuit traces for the ribbon device. This ribbon device is ideal for ductless systems. I reference here that the PTACs, package terminal air conditioners, great, like hotels, hospitals have them where you can control in the rooms the heat and the cold air. The mid-size unit has significantly higher ions per cubic centimeter. Remember, ions exist in nature. They're created by waves, they're created by waterfalls, by sunlight, by lightning. It's just about an oxygen molecule, O2, imparted with energy that splits into a positive oxygen molecule and it kicks off a negative electron, which is absorbed by the oxygen molecule and becomes a negative ion. They float around in the air like a cloud of snow flurry, and the more the better to be able to disrupt COVID. With this higher level one for bigger air handling, systems, the reason it's so much higher in terms of ions per cubic centimeter is the distance that the ions need to travel down trunk ducts to get to the rooms. Okay, lighting, easy, right? You've had LED lights in your homes, your offices, your businesses in this last 10 years. When we started, nothing, maybe a flashlight had them. So made in America back in 2010, top ROI, low operating expense, low capital expense, 10 years in business, and industry-leading 10-year warranty, cutting the electricity bill often in half. Proven track record, Morgan Stanley's corporate headquarters right there in New York's Times Square, dozens and dozens of other buildings in New York for all kinds of facility operators and managers. Walter Reed National Military Medical Center. They've weighed multiple presidents now. I think Biden may have stopped in under our lights, which is exciting. That was a 7-figure project for us. And from small businesses to major real estate development firms, including CBRE, lots of projects, thousands of projects over the years. Photos of some of them, including the Comfort, which rolled into Manhattan's harbor, 30 Navy ships that we've done, and I can tell you with Marine Corps Base Quantico and even the U.S. Air Force Base Thumb Rates in Oman has our lights. Okay, what makes Independence really pretty unique is our ability to have a power hub driver on request from customers where we use direct current, low voltage. So the savings comes in instead of alternating current. This could become the new standard for buildings. We move electricity through alternating current. It is the most cost-effective way to move electrons. But when we get inside of a building, those little outlets in your wall that plug in your phone or your laptop, well, there's an inverter. That inverter is turning alternating current coming from the socket into your device to direct current. The power hub changes the alternating to direct current at a hub, 1600 watts, 16 channels of 100 watts, and the savings on lighting is an average about 11.5% over every other LED on the market. So this is not that we invented direct current, it's that we have the option for fixtures for LEDs that do not have drivers. The driver is at the hub level. Okay, building fit, keeping score, fault detection and diagnostics, analytics, visualize platforms that identify opportunities to make buildings more energy efficient, reliable, comfortable, and safe. So think of the chiller plan and then the building management system. Well, we like to go in with measurement and verification, the M&V, earlier than keeping the score at the end because we like to use it as a diagnostic. And then the energy conservation measures kick in from the learning about where that savings exists. And that learning came up in an example up in New Haven at a science park that was established by Yale University. They called about 10 days after we'd gone live last year with the optimization with OptiKW. And they said they've never turned the chillers off except for the coldest days in January. And the chiller was not running. This was September for the first time ever. And they said, turn it back on. Something went wrong with your algorithm. And we said, why don't you wait a couple hours? We're going to look into it because our screens show that the temperature is the same, is held at the 68 degrees, your target. And they said, we see that too, but it looks like the chiller's, not on. And they call back in 2 hours around 11 p.m. and they say, thank you for turning the chiller back on. And we said, we didn't. It turned itself back on. So the machine learning and the beginning of artificial intelligence for buildings is now upon us. We taught it to use the outside conditions to know when to rest. It's like those cars that turn off now at a stoplight and they restart. So this is crazy exciting to see the integration within our five-star, family of companies to be able to take care of the air and the energy for safe and efficient buildings. All the screens, all the measurement are about giving a sense of comfort and knowledge to the facility managers themselves. I happen to love these screens because in my Model 3, the Tesla, I always click on the energy performance. So as you're driving, you can see how how well you're doing relative to the battery function and the energy consumption, even on hills going up and down. Okay, managing energy relative to building management systems, whether it's Allerton or Allen Bradley, Johnson Controls, KMC, we don't care. I think this is important for everyone on this call to understand that it's not about designing something totally new. It's using the existing building equipment. It's using the existing building management system and tuning them and extracting extra data. None of us like the Google story with data and following everything we do and what we search on and all the Facebook controversy with privacy. But this is the smartest use of big data. Buildings that can start to teach the facility management team how to run them more efficiently. Buildings that can communicate with each other on college campuses where the data is shared to learn best practices. Campuses that can share information with other states, other countries to get better at what we do. Okay, utilizing the data. Clean tech partners for turnkey system approach, mapping thousands of data points, communicating via platforms that generate machine learning and AI. Next generation of smart buildings. And we can all do this without any upfront cost because it's not just our groups with hundreds of millions of dollars available to front the cost. It's the rebates. It's the infrastructure money. It's many, many private companies that will put dollars to work where over a 5-year or even a 7-10-year term, the operators of buildings and the facility management firms do not have to spend the money up front. The percentage of savings is typically so high relative to the total cost of running HVAC, including cleaning the indoor air, that the savings per month in energy is higher than the cost to pay over time for that benefit. Sometimes it's 50%, saving $10,000 a month, maybe the cost is $5,000 to pay for all the equipment in the service. Again, not just our companies, this is a pattern for performance contracting across the energy marketplace. Okay, largest energy management companies in the world do not focus as much as they should on these types of proven and affordable efficiency technologies. They don't pay the electric bill. So the hunting that we have done over many decades in my career and with tremendous colleagues to find these types of solutions is granular. We joke that we're like SEAL Team 6 that's going after bin Laden as specialists, not the big aircraft carrier. And I think we're going to start to see adoption at more and more levels as the case studies continue to build and build. American lead, but can lead by example with the proof and the results. And the pilot programs are an easy way to see the performance at any facility. There it is. I'm open for questions or from the speakers in this presentation, listening to questions and hearing the responses from the other group. But thank you all for your attention today.
Thank you so much, Charlie. That was an amazing presentation, and I have to apologize and say that I sold you short by just putting your affiliation as Purge Virus. But it was amazing just to look at everything that Energy Intelligence Center, all the solutions that you have, and how they really all do form an amazing synergy to make spaces more energy efficient, safer. So, I just watching that presentation felt like a kid at a candy store, looking at all of the different things you had to offer. And really just, I love that idea that we're not reinventing the wheel here. These technologies do exist. It's just leveraging what we have available. Your presentation also has brought about a flurry of comments and questions. So thank you, everybody. Please keep those questions coming. As I have the privilege of hosting this event, I'm going to selfishly start with 2 of my own questions first, and then I'll open it up to the rest of the people asking some great questions. But I just wanted to start off with Adam and Matt. You guys mentioned, and I'm surprised about this, but maybe not, that the decrease in carbon emissions is not maybe as large as we might have thought during this past year. And you mentioned that this has led to companies making more of a commitment to decrease their own emissions, and you mentioned the action gap. I was wondering if you could dig in a little more to what you think JLL and what we can do to help companies close up this action gap.
Yeah, I mean, as a, as a company or as a kind of person, so I always say is start asking is the best solution. So if you're looking for a new job or you know people who are, like, you'd be surprised how many organizations react to the fact that new employees are asking what that organization is doing around climate change. So it's a pretty interesting notion that, just companies realizing that's going to impact their prospects for retaining talent or hiring new talent is going to be an interesting way of driving action. Asking about it from companies you buy. That's probably the simplest thing you could do, and just continue the kind of hold people accountable. So I think that, buying or making purchasing decisions based on climate or environmental impacts is going to be a really big shift, and that's what a lot of these organizations are gearing up for. In terms of what you can do as professionals, I think that varies based on what you do, but I think it feels like we're in the middle of, especially if you've been in this industry for over 10 years like myself, but I think it's really just the beginning. So I think that there's a lot of different steps. Even just being here is a step, right?
Yeah, exactly. So that's great. And Adam, I'm curious, you talked a little bit about the trends going back to work. What do you think about the shift towards more spaces that look like WeWorks? What do you think might happen there?
I think that spaces are going to be used differently, so not a specific kind of space use type expert by any means. But I think going back to some of the slides that Matt was showing in terms of how the spaces are going to be kind of repurposed, because and I just want to make sure that I'm clear of that, like 80% number that was thrown out. The estimation is not that 80% of workers are going to be full-time in the office by the end of December, but kind of 80% of workers are going to be back to the office in some capacity by then. And I think what the conversations that at least I've been privy to with a lot of our clients, especially corporate occupiers and ones that are like occupying tenant spaces, is understanding like how to repurpose some of those and moving towards like hoteling situations or more collaboration spaces, or even using that real estate to be able to have more amenity functions in there, and trying to figure out how to entice people to be in the space and how to most effectively use those spaces. So not necessarily, I haven't seen it, maybe Matt's seen more, necessarily seen where people are like abandoning in a large scale kind of the normal lease structure, but definitely conversations around downsizing have been happening.
That makes sense. That's interesting. And
Can
one question
can I
for
jump
you.
in? Yeah,
Sure.
can I follow up on that for a second? If we all worked from either home or a shared environment, and we continue to eat what we do and continue to use the HVAC system and fish the oceans. I don't know if you've seen the Attenborough film, but when you fish, you're not just dragging fish out, you're dragging sometimes with the nets, the sea grasses, and there are elements to climate change that are so macro in terms of how our role is. The human waste, the bio waste, I didn't do this on the slideshow, but we have hydrothermal carbonization that turns biomass into energy, like landfills, the things we have in terms of products. So architecture is crazy important, but the proof that it didn't make that big of a difference is with transportation, we stopped traveling, right? The airline industry, all those things, all the cars. And it was about a 6.5% impact, all in for climate. We have to systematically think about how we live, not just what we drive or where we work. And so food and how we process foods. And I was born in the mid 60s, and I thought it was strange. Like our apex predator species called humankind has doubled in a single generation. Pretty rare for a fruit fly or an elephant, right? You don't double the population. But with the human waste, it's a kind of a gross discussion. That's now potentially fuel at a whole nother level. How we eat and how we interact with animals and architecture needs to all be put on the table, because there is no magic wand, I don't think, for climate change. It's about systemically integrating all those pieces. And so being an 80-20 plant-based diet to meat, and having a solar house and driving an electric car, like I'm doing everything I possibly can think of, but it's still not making a big dent. It's got to be more people doing similar kinds of things, and packaging instead of all the plastics. There's so many things that have to go into this. So there's Charlie Serrati's 2 cents on think globally but act locally.
No, I like it. Thank you for your thoughts there. I mean, I think it is just all about chipping away on what we can do on an individual basis and figuring out what we can do on a more global basis as well. I'm going to ask you one question, and then I'll open it up to everyone else. But I'm curious, because you mentioned that you had the idea for purge virus even before the pandemic started. What made you want to develop that? And have you seen like a big uptick in business since everything that's been going on in the last year?
Absolutely. Thank you for asking. So I have multiple patents, pending and granted over the last 30 years. But the move with the lighting was to look at what ultraviolet could do at the semiconductor level inside of the ductwork. And so we were looking at hospital-acquired infections and all those things, multiple years ago, and it turned out that no one really cared. You see, it was like the hospitals were doing some of it in their operatory theaters, but they weren't really doing whole buildings. And then purge virus was just born out of the reality that we should be cleaning the air. And so it opened up with New York high rises and dental practices and everything we're doing now on the West Coast and in Arizona with Navajo Nation. And it's exciting even for homeowners cleaning the air, because the tech has been developed since the 1950s and 60s for ultraviolet at a pretty high level, but only in the last 3 years with the bipolar ionization, we got rid of the ozone. You see, so the problem with the ionization was it was kind of like a little mad science. You don't see it. There was concerns about respiratory, issues. So that's all been now vetted, third-party tested, EPA, FDA proven. So I think it is going to be a new standard, like the LED lights. And if Adam's nodding along, that's generally a good sign, unless he's nodding at someone else in the room. But the idea is we can do better. We need to discard some of the old perceptions about air quality. And I started telling people, the spigot, the faucet has clean water. Unless you're in Flint, Michigan, you expect it to be clean. Well, air coming out of the supply duct should be clean. And the danger with an HVAC system is Carol can cough in the science lab at an elementary school and give Carl COVID a room away in the art studio. But we thought of the blood system as systemic, and the ducts work as like a vehicle to move the clean air, right? So if you clean it at the air handling unit, you don't have to use the portable devices in each room. You don't have to spend as much time cleaning the surfaces, because the air is clean going out, and there's already a fan in the HVAC system. So it was like all this hard work and sustainability for 3 decades and a handful of years with interior disinfection for IAQ, and COVID hit. And I'm hoping we take this opportunity and make lemonade out of this ugly, ugly pandemic to set some new standards, at the federal and state level, that really make it safer for people to avoid this ever happening again.
Thank you. Yeah, it's interesting. Our last Green Home event last month was on designing for wellness and the link to air quality there. So it all is linked together. But it was good to hear your Genesis story on that. So I'm going to open it up to Ariel, if you want to start asking the questions that people posted in the chat box. That would be great.
Absolutely. I'll be taking over facilitation of Q&A from here. So our first question was from Leo Gordon, and I'm actually going to combine his first question with one that he sent just recently. So for all panel members, how big an impact has work from home had in terms of energy efficiency of residential buildings versus purpose-built, that being maybe LEED certified office spaces? And with that, I'm just going to combine the question of, are there any numbers for how much, or rather how little, energy reduction was actually accomplished as a result of large number of empty office buildings?
I found online 6.5%. So I don't know, again, I haven't done all the cross checking. That was, a week ago. But the play becomes, what happens beyond transportation, because we were all running our screens. I'm saying, we were all using in the summer air conditioning. We just were using it at home versus at the office.
Mhm.
So I'm not surprised that it's relatively low, unless Adam and Matt have some different numbers.
Yeah, I think it was low, and I think there's going to be a lot more research. So I'm kind of holding off on giving hard numbers on what residential usage went up because people are home and what went down in office environments. I think the true answer, anecdotally, from just what we've seen, is that it hasn't been what you thought it would be. If you were guessing it was 50%, you were way off, and that's, I think, a testament to how much of our energy use is kind of fixed in motion and isn't adjusting dynamically with the usage of the space. So I think that's a big takeaway here.
Great, thank you. Next question is from Evan Mason. How are ventilation recommendation increases going to impact carbon emissions? And what do we recommend as far as local law 97 goes with those carbon emissions?
Yeah, so that is the big question that we've been getting, that I've been getting over the last year and change, is that all the recommendations are saying increase airflow, but you're also saying decrease energy consumption. So I think the short-term priority that most buildings and operators have leaned into is first prioritizing the indoor environmental quality and increasing airflow where required. There are other sorts of technologies that have been implemented. You talked about bipolar ionization, but also even just making sure that filtration requirements are up to snuff as well. But in the conversations that I've had with building operators and facilities operators, has also been that this is an opportunity to take a look at your systems and do a deep inventory of what's the remaining useful life on some of these systems. If you know that you're going to be increasing operation, is this also an opportunity to be able to assess retrofitting them and swapping those out for more efficient systems so that it doesn't have as negative of an impact in terms of your carbon emissions performance, especially related to compliance, like local law 97, which, for those who are not aware, puts carbon emissions limits on buildings in New York City that are 25,000 square feet or larger, of all different building types. So those go into effect in 2024, and then those requirements become even more stringent starting in 2030. So it's definitely a hot topic of making sure that buildings are preparing for those long-term requirements, but also meeting the health standards of today.
Perfect. I think that was exactly the answer I wanted to hear as well. I'm sure Evan Mason feels the same way. Great. Next question is for Charles on the purge virus. Is there an estimate impact on energy use due to increased ventilation or pressure drop due to the filtering?
Okay, so filtering up to the MERV level, the 13, creates static pressure. We're trying to hold the existing filtration. Since the COVID acellular microorganism is so small, it has real issues getting trapped, meaning it's pretty happy because it's getting its way through. We have the issues stopping it. So we do not believe that filtration is the answer because of the size of COVID. And it is the ionization and the ultraviolet that does not create a net significant energy consumption at all. In fact, it's cleaning the coils to save energy. So it's the opposite. Just adding big filters is a band-aid, not a solution.
All right, I had to unmute myself there. Thank you, Charles. Another one from Leo Gordon. For the technology to limit the effect of oil fouling, it didn't sound like, I'm assuming this is in regards to Cryogen X4. It didn't sound like it was avoiding the movement of oil into the coils, but rather reducing the effect it has on efficiency. Would this lead to issues further down the line, or would the effects of possible oil flowing in the coils but not adhering to the coils be so negligible that it doesn't matter? Oof.
So it's actually preventing the coil from adhering at any level to those surfaces inside of the refrigerant loop. And these have been running for 10 years. So I would be amazed if there's any issue with oil. This isn't something that was just invented. This is a strategic partner of ours that's done this for preferred partners with Anheuser-Busch for like major facilities, that have been vetted. So I don't know exactly that question, and I can follow up with maybe some more detail in an email, because I'm going to be available. It's charlie@eicteam.com, because I can't imagine we're going to get through it all by 8 o'clock today. But the general answer is no oil disrupting the refrigerant with Cryogen X4. Thank
you. My particular question also has to do with Cryogen X4. Figured it's a good segue. Is Cryogen X4 thermal technology going to be installed after a certain number of years or upon initial HVAC operation, or is it the owner's responsibility to know when his or her HVAC is not operating efficiently and to call a installer to have Cryogen X4 installed? Great question. Within that first year, you might see a 2 to 3% efficiency loss because of some of the oil fouling, and year 3 to 5 becomes 6, 8, 10%. And if you don't touch it for 15 years, you can be 20, 30+% loss in efficiency. So there's no reason not to do it in the beginning. It lasts the life of the equipment. It is a protective coating. It's like putting a smart screensaver on your phone, like before you start using it, right? You don't wait till it cracks to get a screensaver. Got it. Earlier, the better. Correct. Also from Gal Spanier, this probably is hinted towards Adam. We will almost, if it is true that we will almost be back to full occupancy by the end of the year, what electrical engineering technologies can we implement now that the buildings are still empty, and implement them realistically in the remaining 6 to 7 months?
Yeah, it's a good question. In terms of that, I mean, for major systems, a lot of the times it does take several months of kind of assessments and then implementation and commissioning. For all of that, I might have to get back to him, honestly, of thinking that in such a short time frame. We have, that being said, kind of my non-answer to it is we have seen over the last year and a half that this has been a really big opportunity for buildings to be kind of streamlining their upgrades and some of these systems that they were looking to do anyway, and actually fast tracking a lot of those sorts of capital projects in terms of ones that have not yet been investigated that could be started now. I can get back to him on that.
Great. Hopefully he's listening. I'm sure he is. This one's from Miss Heidi Butler. Wow. Are concerns about rising sea levels being taken seriously by builders in New York City. After all, we are an island.
I think it's who you talk to. Some builders do care, and others, haven't let it sink in yet. So remember, like, if you look at a coral reef and you see it bleached, that's a bigger indication. When I was at the Galapagos Island, on a ship from the National Geographic Group, looking at the water quality and all the things, than seeing an ocean level rise. So there's 100 ways to see the issues of climate change, but I don't think the big New York players care so much about the water rising. The ones that are involved with stewardship care about their children and grandchildren and doing the right thing and how they live and build, not necessarily just the water level. That is one piece of the problem of climate change.
So, from a investor perspective, you have seen a lot of larger organizations take to putting some critical infrastructure, higher up in buildings. So, things like switchgear or mechanical infrastructure that, would have historically been in the basement, that has been moved higher. What I would say is that a lot of this change, since we aren't really providing a lot of regulation around it, is going to come from the insurance industry. So you're going to see a lot of organizations, and we already have, who are asking for kind of resiliency consulting on sea level change and other things like wildfires. Obviously not in New York, that isn't the issue that we're looking at here, but there's a whole slew of organizations that are creating reports to assess the likelihood of a building, having some kind of natural disaster and how that's changing over time. And that's going to impact the sale price of that and the insurance rates that these developers pay. So they're going to care. And their more sophisticated buyers are going to be, 5 to 10 years ahead of where, the organization they're either selling to or buying from know. So it's a huge competitive advantage, I think. Unfortunately, you'd like to see it more seriously addressed from a regulatory perspective, so that it isn't whoever gets the best or pays for the best intelligence or information makes the most educated decision, because there's obviously potential other costs from a public standpoint.
Great. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Charlie, for that one. It is closing in on 8 p.m. and I just want to thank the speakers once again, Charlie, Matt, and Adam, for these great presentations and conversation. And quickly, just to let everybody know, Green Home's upcoming events. We have a Green Careers event the second Tuesday of every month. So this one will be on sustainable transportation, May 11th. Our next forums event is on New York City's streetscape, May 19th. And we will be having a really interesting tour at Jones Beach Energy and Nature Center, May 15th. That one is definitely not one to be missed. And if you are interested in volunteering, this takes place the right before these forums happen. So that's the third Wednesday of every month. So again, I want to thank you all for joining. And what we would typically do if we were in person is we would direct everybody to the nearest watering hole and be able to continue the conversation and ask more questions to the speakers. So what we have been doing now with the virtual format is, if people are interested, they can stay on, they can unmute themselves, put their video on and keep the conversation going. No obligation. And if the speakers are interested, we invite you as well to stay on and answer any questions. But thank you again so much, everyone. And hope to see you at the next Green Home event.
Thank you.
Jenny,
Really appreciate it.
thank you. I have a hard stop,
Thank
so
you.
I'm going to be available on the emails, but really appreciate everyone's questions and the time today. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlie.
Thank you, everyone.